With just a few hours to go before the close of 2015, we take a look at the gains and losses in Africa's economy and its ties with the rest of the globe. Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa. I'm Uche Okoronko, and today we bring you a special program where we review and look back at what happened in Africa's business sector in 2015. Now here's what's coming up on the show. From the Silicon Valley in America, we bring you a review of the year in technology. And we sample Africa's creativity innovations that contributed to its economic growth. Now, African countries weathered a global economic financial crisis and a drop in commodity prices in 2015. Economic growth was set to slow in sub-Saharan Africa to 3.7% this year from about 4.6% in 2014. That's according to the World Bank. Now, this will be the lowest since 2009. Now, let's take a look at some of the good and the bad in the African economy circa 2015.
2015 proved to be a tough year for Africa's economy, faced with a slowdown in export markets and a slump in commodity prices, particularly oil, putting robust economic growth rates in jeopardy. In Africa's biggest economy, Nigeria, the effects of a global oil price slump saw its economic growth drop to 5.54%, down from an estimated 6.23% in 2014. The central bank devalued the currency by 8% at the end of November to try to halt the decline in its foreign exchange reserves, hit by falling oil prices.
Slump in the oil price, in my opinion, yes, it will hit us in terms of revenues, because we know 70-80% of government revenue is based on crude. But also, we also look at the other side. The drop in price means that we also import refined PMS. So, of course, the money we have to spend on subsidies to get these refined products in also goes down.
In nearby Ghana, a struggling economy saw recurring nationwide protests against what Ghanaians say was the government's mishandling of the economy. Ghana's government and the International Monetary Fund signed a 3-year funding deal worth $940 million that led to hopes of restoring fiscal stability. While in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe's crumbling economy was dealt a new blow when the International Monetary Fund announced that the government economy would weaken further after growing by 3.1%. Times were hard in the corporate world in East Africa. One of the continent's biggest airline faced uncertainty. Kenya Airways announced plans to sell off part of its old fleet and some land to see the national carrier through a cash crisis caused by a drop in passenger numbers.
Today we are focused on making sure that we are commercially and financially efficient, and that's why we are focusing on the commercial side of the business to make sure we are taking all the opportunity we can, even in a difficult commercial space with security concerns around us.
But it was not all gloom for the continent. In June, representatives from 25 African nations signed an initial agreement to create a free trade zone linking 3 economic blocs that would unite 57% of the continent's population. The deal also intends to reduce trade barriers that will bring down prices and boost economic activity between African countries, which has long been hampered by many factors, including poor infrastructure.
The challenges are that it is a very bureaucratic system. These countries, some of them are Arabic speaking, some of them are English speaking, some of them are French speaking. They cut across, the infrastructure doesn't support and facilitate this. But it's going to take a long time to accomplish, and not to talk of when you see the benefits. The benefits take much longer to accrue to the participating countries.
In Ethiopia, Heineken took steps to rapidly expand the beer market in Africa's second most populous country, where the group is the first of the big international brewers to build a new plant.
At the moment we are developing our position in the local market. Like I said, our first priority is to become a national player, fulfill our ambition to become a national player all over Ethiopia. That's our first priority. Export also has to do a lot with the supply chain. In order to be able to export, you have to have a supply chain adapted to the export markets.
African countries have been challenged to use 2016 to step in and exploit the emerging opportunities for export as part of efforts to move away from largely agriculture-based economies. Susan Mungeli, CCTV.
Now let's turn our attention to the oil sector and get some more insight into the short and long-term implications of the plunging oil prices. We're joined by EcoBank Group's Head of Energy Research, Dolapo Oni. Dolapo, great to have you on the show with us. Now, looking at the oil sector landscape right now and the state that it's in, we're seeing Saudi Arabia has resolved to maintain production levels. OPEC, on the other hand, its oil producers continue to produce without restraint. Russia plans to increase production. And of course, Iran will be entering the market this coming year. Now, it certainly looks like another rough year for oil prices. What are your thoughts on that, Dolapo?
Thank you for having me in your studio. And honestly, I think it's quite evident where oil supply is going. Supply will continue to grow, and possibly we could see higher levels of oil supply into the global market compared to this year. Where the worry will be oil demand. We don't think oil demand will be as strong, and some of the forecasts we've seen already show that oil demand might be weak. So clearly what you want to focus on is the balance between demand and supply. If it continues to increase, clearly we're going to see lower oil prices. And of course, with lower oil prices means lower revenues for most of the oil economies in Africa.
Now, Dolapo, the International Energy Agency puts demand growth for 2016 at an average of 1.2 million barrels per day versus OPEC's projection of about 1.25 million barrels per day. Now, what is the general outlook for demand? You already talked about it, but tell us a bit more.
Yeah, you see, and this is worrying because don't forget, in 2015, we saw what we could call peak demand in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, we've seen demand grow steadily, and in 2015, it got to the highest of about 1.8 million barrels per day in terms of the additional demand growth year on year. And the forecast before that had been about 1.58, 1.6. So it was actually exceeded expectations. So I wouldn't even want to compare IEA's forecast to OPEC's forecast. I'd rather compare to last year, which shows a significant decline. And the real worry for that is China. We don't think the growth in China is going to remain as strong. And but there's a flip side to that. We've seen gasoline demand in China grow. The amount of cars in China increasing. China is becoming becoming a gasoline consuming country. So I think that's somewhat good for demand. Another thing again you want to look at is the fact that in Asia generally, India and China are building oil storage. Compared to the OECD countries who have an average of about 220 days of storage of oil, the Asian giants, India and China, have roughly about 70 to 90 days between them. So they need to raise that up. India is commissioning 2 new storage facilities in January. China is looking to do more between Q1 and Q2 as well. So that could sort of support oil demand. So it could go various ways, but I think 1.2 is being moderate in terms of forecast.
Well, thank you so much, Dolapo. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there, but thanks for your insights. He's joining us, of course, from Lagos. Now, this year has seen major world powers embarking on aggressive campaigns to reach out for a sustainable business relationship with Africa. Major world leaders were either on ground to woo the continent or played host to its head of governments. Now, Noel Mwakugu has the wrap.
For the first time, the continent played host to the 6th Forum for China-Africa Cooperation. Leaders and investors converge in Johannesburg, South Africa. In the last 5 summits, China has always doubled its financial development package to the continent.
The achievement of inclusive and sustainable development in Africa hinges on industrialization. And industrialization also holds the key to creating jobs, eradicating poverty, and improving people's living standards. Africa's path of industrialization can only be found by African people through their own practice and exploration. It is China's sincere hope to share its experience with African countries. And we are willing to provide capital, technology, and personnel in support of African industrialization.
Investors from America, seemingly conscious of the possibility of missing the slice of the African pie, jetted into the continent and the Global Entrepreneurship Summit was the avenue. Kenya was the host of this event. President Obama did not mince his words on the continent's importance.
Africa is on the move. Africa is one of the fastest growing regions of the world. People are being lifted out of poverty, incomes are up, the middle class is growing, and young people like you are harnessing technology to change the way Africa is doing business, as President Kenyatta alluded to. And that creates incredible opportunities for Africans and for the world.
India, soon to become the world's most populous country, has its work cut out to catch up with China, whose annual trade with Africa is 3 times larger than its own of $72 billion. While hosting leaders from Africa in October, Prime Minister Narendra Modi promised $7.4 billion in soft loans and $1.2 billion in aid provided since the first India-Africa summit in 2008. In the meantime, the European Union's way of encouraging trade has been to sign trade deals with 7 African regions. The economic partnership agreements, as they are known, allow duty-free trade between the continent and Europe, but many in Africa say these deals just mean EU companies with their advanced technologies can swamp African markets. The EU, however, insists that this isn't the case, and there are clauses in the deals which protect African producers. A glimmer of hope now lies on the recent outcome when the 162 members of the WTO met in Africa for the first time. Ministers from member countries reached a deal on the issue of farm export subsidies. Developed nations are now expected to get rid of the subsidies immediately, while developing nations should start in 2018.
Today's decision tackles the issue once and for all. It removes the distortions that these subsidies cause in agricultural markets, thereby helping to level the playing field for the benefit of farmers and exporters in developed and least developed countries.
2015 has been a year of courting Africa. The continent now eagerly awaits for the fruition of these investment opportunities. Nurmakugu, CCTV.
So how then did Africa fare in building sustainable bridges with the rest of the globe? Well, I spoke to Ali Khan Asachu, he's the CEO of Rich Management, earlier today about how much these events changed the tide in terms of trade between Africa and the rest of the world.
Uche, you know, we've had extraordinary macro developments. We've had the price of oil fall from above $100 to last trading at $36. We've had huge moves in the commodity markets, and I think these macro moves, which are like the tectonic plates shifting, unfortunately outweigh these very significant conferences. I think, you know, it is good, FOCAC, FOCAC, WTO, these all put Africa front and center of the news cycle and put Africa's issues on the table. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, far outweighing events were what's happened in the markets, which are having a huge effect on the big beasts of the African economy, like Nigeria, South Africa, and we've seen huge reactions in the markets. I think these conferences were more of trying to put a safety net. How bad is it? Can we help? Can we do something about it?
Now, Mr. Sancho, what are your thoughts on the recent WTO MC10 summit that took place here in Nairobi? We did see developed countries agree to stop subsidies on farming exports, which of course was a plus for the continent, but talks on the other trade barriers were still left unresolved. What is your take on this year's meeting, and of course how much it really benefited the continent?
Well, you know, it's lovely, and I think we all got a warm feeling from seeing the World Trade Conference being held in Nairobi. I think expectations were ludicrously high. You know, people were expecting some kind of silver bullet. We got a few gains. We got an agricultural gain, but will it be implemented? I'm not so convinced. The farmers' lobbies are enormously strong in North America and in Europe. So I think, you know, we can pat ourselves on the back, but the proof's going to be in the pudding. And I think these were incremental gains which were parlayed into something more substantial. But when we see what actually comes out of it, I think there's room for disappointment, I'm afraid. I think the situation, I think the positive thing is that Africa got itself at the table. The problem with the continent is, we're 54, 55 countries. Getting everybody aligned, getting everybody's priorities aligned is not an easy thing. Somewhere like China, you've got one letterbox. In Africa, you've got 55. That's the challenge.
Well, in terms of intra-regional trade, one major move made this year was, of course, we saw 26 African countries agreeing to establish a tripartite free trade area by January 2016. Do you think the continent has really made big steps towards boosting intra-regional trade this year? And what, of course, is your outlook for 2016?
So, look, this is very much inter-African trade is the silver bullet. Our intra-African trade numbers are way too low. They're all in the sort of very low teens typically. And I think obviously there is a massive opportunity for Africa to trade more with each other. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, as we enter 2016, are there any major deals we can look towards in terms of trade within Africa and globally? And of course, what is your general outlook for trade relations in 2016? Give us a little bit more of that.
So I think, unfortunately, the main issues are going to be around commodity prices, how countries deal with that, how countries deal with the fiscal side. And, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that this issue is front and center in Luanda, in Lagos, in Kinshasa. But beyond that, I think, we've seen progress this year. We have Africa's key issues on the table. And I think Africa has to be relentless about negotiating, about being on top of its issues, and being aware of who their main partners are. We tend to forget that actually Africa's biggest partner is Europe. So that is one relationship that needs to be nurtured and not forgotten about. But the key issue for me, the silver bullet, the holy grail of this whole thing is intra-African trade. We've got to bust that wide open. We've got to break our borders. We've got to start doing business with each other at a multiple of what we're doing right now. And we've got to get on with it.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sachu, for giving us your insight. Of course, he's joining us here in our Nairobi studios.
Pleasure.
And still ahead, from the Silicon Valley in America, we bring you a review of the year in technology.
Time is money. Money invested here equals infrastructure development here. We analyze how decisions made in the boardroom can impact the life of the average worker in Durban or a farmer's output in Kenya. From data from companies' annual reports, their financial results, to reports from the World Bank and the IMF, we will break down these reports with in-depth data analysis and guest interviews. From the nations that are making economic turnarounds to individual grassroots success stories, this is Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, as the year draws to a close, let's reflect on the winners and losers in Africa's business space over the past 12 months. And let's start with the biggest beer merger globally. Now, the world's largest brewer, AB InBev, finalized an agreement to acquire its closest rival, SABMiller, for nearly $106 billion, creating what it said would be the first truly global brewer. Now, the deal, reached after months of negotiations, would create a beer industry giant with annual revenue of about $64 billion and would give AB InBev a substantial operation in Africa and greater dominance in Latin America. Now, to the mining sector, a big loser this year, of course, is the mining sector. And after another awful year, it's easily the worst performing sector in 2015 as excess supply continues to push down commodity prices. Now, despite cutting production, selling assets and halting dividends, heavyweight miners continue to struggle, none more so than Glencore. The miner and commodities trader is having some success tackling its gigantic debt pile, but the share price is still down about 70% this year. And over to the banking sector, we look at Kenya Tanzania's commercial bank group, it's a big winner this year. Its pre-tax profit rose about 10% to $191.1 million in the first 9 months of this year, helped by higher net interest income. And of course, the bank, which has operations across East Africa from Tanzania to South Sudan, said net interest income grew 10%. It now has a green light from the government of Ethiopia to open an office in the Horn of Africa. Now over to the telecoms industry. Of course, a big loser this year is South Africa's MTN. The Nigerian Communications Commission imposed a penalty on MTN for failing to meet a deadline to disconnect 5.1 million unregistered subscribers. Now this as security agencies seek to fight crime in a country with poor identity records. The initial fine of $5.2 billion was reduced by 25% earlier this month following talks with the regulator. However, MTN has said it continues to engage with the Nigerian authorities even as it seeks a resolution in court. Now, it's fair to say new technologies and innovations were front and center around the world. Computer chips got smaller, while devices got even smarter. Here's CCTV's Mark Neo, who has been covering the tech scene all year and fills us in on the biggest trends to hit the sector.
This little device continues to transform lives. I can order my dinner, my groceries, find a parking spot, or even rent out someone else's home with a few taps of a button. And one of the best at perfecting this recipe for success is Uber. Now in at least 67 countries, the app-based taxi service has a valuation of more than $50 billion, on par with GM and Ford, though Uber doesn't own a single car or employ any full-time drivers. But Uber has been embroiled in a slew of lawsuits.
There's this constant feeling you're on the verge of losing your access to the platform and driving. It's not a comfortable experience.
Having been trounced in the mobile arena, Microsoft unveiled Windows 10. Meanwhile, Apple CEO Tim Cook gave his review of Microsoft's Surface Book, calling it diluted, for it tries too hard to do too much, but none well. And while Apple finally released its Apple Watch, for the most part it stuck to its playbook.
The big question for me, what are they going to do for iPhone 7? All the smartphone vendors are talking about the fact that it's getting harder and harder for them to differentiate.
And 2015 was also the year that virtual reality became a reality. Anyone could buy a cheap pair of cardboard goggles like this, pair it with your smartphone, you've got a unique virtual experience. But we're still waiting for the big companies like Sony's Project Morpheus, Facebook's Oculus Rift, and Microsoft's HoloLens to hit the market with a revolutionary experience with virtual reality headsets.
The ability to put somebody into somebody else's reality. It's powerful, it can promote empathy, it can promote a better global understanding.
Action camera maker GoPro also announced plans to enter the drone market soon, joining a host of companies from the US, China, and France in pushing the bounds of what will be allowed in the skies as regulators struggle to keep pace. Still, some tech companies reached for the skies and even higher. In November, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' space startup Blue Origin became the first private company to launch a rocket into space and land it safely on the ground.
It's important, I think, for humans to become spacefaring.
But the founder of electric car maker Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk, tweeted that there's a big difference between getting to space and orbit, something his more powerful SpaceX rockets are capable of doing. In December, SpaceX bettered Bezos in a spaceflight first by launching a SpaceX rocket with 11 satellites into orbit and successfully landing its booster rocket back on Earth. But Elon Musk's Tesla did have an explosive year in a good way, releasing a portable solar-powered battery device for homes and businesses, and the world's first all-electric crossover SUV vehicle, the Model X. So whether it's automotive, energy, virtual reality, or even space travel, tech companies are proving that there truly are no limits to their innovation.
Now, Africa has also seen a boom in technology breakthroughs and innovations in the last few years. And of course, 2015 was no different. Now, quite a number of young innovators showed why homegrown solutions are the answer to many of the region's challenges. Let's take a look.
An innovation revolution swept across Africa in 2015, giving rise to tales of young innovators creating new technologies and applications that are today driving the continent's growth. Tanzanian scientist Dr. Askwar Hilonga created a water filter that he says can remove 99% of bacteria, microorganisms and viruses.
In Tanzania, 70% of households, of 9 million households, are not using any kind of a filter. That is how big the market is. That is in Tanzania alone. 9 million households. Then imagine in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Sub-Saharan Africa, India and elsewhere. So the market is very big.
In neighboring Kenya, a mobile phone application called Eneza, Swahili word for reach, is hoping to revolutionize learning. The app gives children from poor backgrounds who would otherwise not afford textbooks unlimited access to information at the dial of a simple code. Kenya continued to lead the path of innovation when Google launched their Street View technology in the Samburu National Park to help in conservation efforts, protecting animals from poachers, and to give animal lovers a chance to take virtual tours of the reserve.
Tracking them with the help of Google Earth, we get to see their whole range, and then we understand what elephants need to survive. And that's powerful information if we're going to try and secure elephants' future in Africa.
In Nigeria, two teenage brothers, motivated by a desire to develop the IT industry in Nigeria, came up with their own browser known as Crocodile Browser Lite, that they say is faster and more easily accessible on lower-end phones commonly available in Africa and other developing countries. 4 Nigerian students also developed an app called Humane to help blind people perform tasks like using their smartphones.
We looked at them and we saw that these people are separated from the world, as in they are separated from the people that can't see. All right, they can't move freely on their own. You know, they can't browse the internet, they can't play music, they can't, you know. So we decided, okay, let's just do something for these people and let them be part of the social world.
South Africa also saw the launch of a solar-powered school bag. Made from recycled plastic and using solar technology, the bags are powered during the day and the stored power can then be used to light up homes.
Most importantly, what's helping a lot is the solar lantern. So the parents are coming in saying my child's able to do work, and teachers are coming back and saying homework is not being done. You know, so I think we're affecting all spheres of a child's life.
With so many insightful innovations in 2015, it'll be exciting to see what the next year has to offer and where Africa's technology revolution will lead to. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Well, that's it for a special review of African business in 2015. I'm Uche Okoronko. For me and the team, goodbye.